Chag Sameach. Today and tomorrow are the last days of Sukkot, and then we go into Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. The mitzvah of Sukkah is to shake the lulav and esrog and to sit in the Sukkah. And why is it that Sukkot follows Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? You know, when your child comes home from school, there's two questions you could ask your child. You could either say to your child, what did you learn today? How did you behave in class? Or you could say to your child, did you have a fun day? Did you have a good time at recess? Did you enjoy your lunch? You see, the first question tells your child, I'm interested in knowing how you're doing in school. Are you learning? Are you getting A's on your report card? Are you a good student? But the second question tells the child, I'm not only concerned about your academics. I love you and I love everything about you. And I want to know about your day. If you had fun, if you played a good game at recess, if you and your friends got along today, if you enjoyed the snack I put into your lunch. I care about every aspect of your life, not just your spiritual or growth, but also about your happiness and your general well-being. And this is true not only with our children, but in every relationship. When we show empathy and concern for the lives of others, just their general well-being, that is the greatest display of unconditional love. I'm not only interested in those aspects of your life that impact me. More importantly, I'm interested in what you're interested in, what brings you happiness, what brings you joy. And that's why this is the holiday of joy. Because on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, God wants to know, how are we doing spiritually? How are we doing in our mission on earth? Are we fulfilling our purpose here? Are we following His Torah and the mitzvot? But on Sukkot, God says, I love you and I want to know about all aspects of your life. Just come into the Sukkah, eat, drink, celebrate life. Just let's be together and let's celebrate the joy of day-to-day life, irregardless of your observance of Torah mitzvahs. That was what the days of judgment were about. This is the general love of God for the Jewish people. And that's why the Sukkah, according to Jewish law, only needs 2.5 walls to be kosher. Because you see, when I hug you, I'm creating one wall with my body, a second wall with my arm, and half a wall with my hand. And that's what Sukkot represents. It represents a divine hug. Just like when a child comes to his parent for a big hug, and the mother or father embraces the child, it's an all-encompassing display of love, even more than a kiss, even more than a gazing of the eyes lovingly. It's the all-embracing hug. So too Sukkot is God's all-embracing love for the Jewish people. And God is telling us, I love you unconditionally, irregardless of your past behavior on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's sort of like when a parent tells a child, don't touch the oven because you're going to burn yourself and you're going to hurt yourself. And the child doesn't listen and touches the oven and starts crying because the child burnt themselves. The mother doesn't say, well, I told you not to do it. The mother bends down and wipes away the child's tears and gives the child a hug. So too Hashem says, whatever you've done in the past year, I will grant you forgiveness. I will give you a new chance. And on Sukkot, I will give you an all-embracing love. And one of the greatest joys in life is when we experience that hug. I want to tell you a story that happened. There's a rabbi who lives in Deal, New Jersey. His name is Rabbi Stephen Ammon. And Rabbi Stephen Ammon and his wife were driving to Brooklyn to visit his grandchildren, their grandchildren. And on the way, they were passing Staten Island. And Mrs. Stephen Ammon, her parents are in the cemetery in Staten Island. So as they're driving by the exit, the husband says to the wife, you know, it's right before Rosh Hashanah. There's a custom to go to the cemetery of loved ones. Maybe we should stop and you could pray at the grave of your parents. And Mrs. Ammon says that would be a great idea. And they get off the exit, they go to the cemetery, and Rabbi Stephen Ammon and his wife start praying at the grave of her parents. As they are praying there, they see a funeral comes into the cemetery, a procession. And a few minutes later, one of the family members comes over and says, we're short one for the minyan. would you mind coming over to help us say Kaddish? And Rabbi Stephen Ammon said, of course, I'll be happy to come over and say Kaddish with you. They recited the Kaddish with the minyan, and then the family started to leave. And Rabbi Stephen Ammon said, 1 minute, you didn't cover the grave with dirt. And they said, we have to get back home. We're from Baltimore. We just came here because we have a family plot here, but we have a long drive back. And the cemetery said workers will take care of it. And the family walked off. Rabbi Stephen Ammon was surprised that they would leave their father's grave uncovered. He remembered in yeshiva some 40 years earlier, he learned that you're supposed to cover the grave. And so he asked the people with the tractors who were coming to cover it up with dirt, do you mind if I shovel and show the respect to the deceased by covering up the grave? And they said sure, and they placed all the dirt down, and Rabbi Stephen Ammon stood there for a half hour shoveling all the dirt by himself till he covered up the grave. Before he left, he took note of the name on the marker of the person who passed away, and he wrote it down. When he left the cemetery, he was driving home, he told his wife everything that happened, and he was thinking, why did this happen? Here I was going to Brooklyn to visit my grandchildren. I had no intention of stopping. Last minute we decided to go. Suddenly I'm the 10th man for the minyan, and on top of that, I end up covering up the grave and burying the person single-handedly. So he decided to call his mentor, the rabbi at the yeshiva he learned in some 40 years ago in Baltimore, Rabbi Harold Neuberger, to ask him, by any chance does he know the name of this Jew from his town? And he calls him up and he asks him, do you happen to know the name of this person? And he tells him the whole story that happened. And suddenly there's a silence at the end of the phone. And Rabbi Ammon says to Rabbi Neuberger, are you there? He says, yes, I'm just too shocked to speak. He says, why? He says, let me tell you a story that I never told you. He said, when you were a student in the yeshiva here many years ago, 1 year your father lost his job. And you lived in Seattle, and your father was unemployed, and he bought you a ticket to send you to yeshiva in Baltimore. When you arrived there, I called your father and said, you haven't registered your son. Why is he here? And your father started to cry, and he said, I lost my job. I couldn't afford to pay tuition this year, but please, I sent my son there because I'm begging you, take my son into the yeshiva. I want my son to continue his education, his Jewish education. I was heartbroken for your father. I couldn't turn you down and send you back. So I thought, who can I call a kind, generous Jew who would maybe sponsor your tuition? And I called a certain Jew in town who is known for his generosity, who is a supporter of the yeshiva. I told him the story, and he said he would pay your tuition on the condition that I would not tell the family that he was sponsoring your tuition. The Jew who sponsored your tuition was this Jew that you bury today. And suddenly Rabbi Stephen Ammon understood why God arranged for him to be in that cemetery, to help make a minyan to say Kaddish, and to be the one to show the final respects to this man, because this man was responsible for everything that happened in his life by being able to continue his education and become the person he was and build a family and have children and grandchildren and the nachas and the Yiddishkeit that he has in his life. Sometimes in life we feel Hashem coming down and giving us a big hug. And when we feel that hug, there's nothing that brings us greatest joy. And that is what the holiday of Sukkot is all about. So come into the sukkah, shake the lulav and esrog, eat in the sukkah, eat, drink, laugh, just celebrate your life and know that Hashem loves you and He's hugging you and telling you, you're my child, and I take joy from your joy and happiness in life. Chag Sameach.